is a half recipe of a sweet short crust pastry. So this recipe is actually quite difficult to handle because of the high content of fat to flour in this recipe. So in my bowl I have 125 grams of plain flour, 75 grams of butter and 25 grams of white vegetable fat. So I've got 100 grams of fat in total to 125 grams of pastry. Normally for short crust pastry you'd have half the amount, but this is a really rich pastry and I want to use it for making a small portion of fruit baskets, which could be used in a trio of desserts. So start as normal. You've got your pastry cut into this mixture and then you need to rub it in with your fingertips. Now because you've got such a large amount of fat, you need to be really careful not to overwork this so that it starts to stick together already, because if it sticks together on its own without you adding any extra liquid to it, it's going to be even more difficult to roll. And when you come to remove it from the tin, the chances are that it will just fall apart. So rub in with your fingertips, and you can see from my hand, normally I wouldn't have this much fat on my fingers if I was rubbing in, but there is so much fat in this bowl, it actually makes it quite difficult. So there we go. I have made this in a food processor, which helps to keep all the ingredients nice and cool. However, it's really easy to overdo it in a food processor. A couple of extra turns of the blade and you've got a really thick paste, almost like a shortbread. So when you think there are no large lumps of fat left in here, shake the bowl same as you normally would, and if you can see lumps of fat on the top, just have another quick rub. But as I say, it is quite difficult to get rid of all the lumps of fat because of the amount of fat we've got. So into this I am going to add, as it's a sweet short crust pastry, I'm going to put 1/2 to 2/3 of a dessert spoon of sugar in there, and I'm just going to wash my hands. So that's between 5 and 7.5 grams of sugar, and I'm going to add just a teaspoon of lemon juice. That helps to cut through a little bit of the fat. And then the final ingredient for getting this pastry to stick together, normally we'd use water, because this is a rich pastry I'm going to use some egg, and I happen to have some egg whites here that are left over from doing something else, and I'm just trying to scoop up enough to be the equivalent of 1/2 an egg. So the full recipe calls for a whole egg, and I just want 1/2 an egg in this bowl. And then you stir with a knife, and it should go together really quickly and easily for you. There you go, and you can see it makes quite a sticky paste for a pastry. If you have time in your lesson, I would recommend putting this into the fridge or the freezer for a little while to make it easier to roll, because it is, as you can see, a really soft dough. It feels a little bit like a shortbread. I don't have time to do that, so I am going to just flour my worktop and get this ready to roll. So on my worktop, as you can see, I've been quite generous with the flour today because I haven't had time to let this pastry chill. I've got my bun trays out and my cutters ready. So I'm just going to knead this lightly on the worktop, not a lot, because I don't want to get too much of that flour worked into it, and then making sure I've got plenty of flour underneath so it's not going to stick, and on the top gently roll with the rolling pin. And the same as I would normally do, I am going to move this dough every time that I roll. It is such a soft dough, I need to know if it is going to be sticking. And you have to be careful moving this, because picking it up in your fingers you can easily stretch and tear. So whereas normal short crust pastry would be a pass, level 2 pass in your exam, this type of short crust pastry, if you get it right, would normally be a level 2 merit, because it is much more difficult to work with. And then depending on what you do with it, you can of course move that up to a distinction. So I want a nice thin short crust pastry here. So I want a nice thin rich dough, because I'm going to use this to make some little fruit baskets. So I do not want there to be loads of pastry and no fruit in this. So a couple of millimetres thick, and then I have 2 sizes of tin. So one of the tins is just a normal bun tray, as you would normally use, and my cutter fits over the top of the hole, so I can see how my cutter would fit in there. And I'm going to use the fluted side, because I want this to be, this is for fruit and I want it to be sweet, so I'd rather use a fluted cutter than a plain cutter. And then each piece of pastry needs to be picked up and just carefully popped on top of the tin. And I'm not going to worry about pushing my pastry down at all for the minute. I'm just going to get the pastry into the tin. The second tin that I've got is a slightly bigger tin, it's a deeper tin, so this is more going to allow me to put more filling in, and because it's a deeper tin, the size of the cutter I've got is bigger than the hole in the tin. So I'm going to do a couple of each, and it is entirely up to you which one you do, but I'm just going to see if I can get 4, or just about, I can get 5 of those as well. So same as before, I'm just going to lift this pastry up and put it on top of the tin. I'm going to scrunch, when I've got the other 4 bits on there, I'm going to scrunch this up and roll this again, see if I can get a couple more, and then I will show you what we need to do to that pastry. Okay, I managed to get 7 little rounds of pastry in each size for the tins, and what I wanted to show you was, if you just leave the pastry resting on the top, as you've rolled it you've stretched it. So I tend to position this and just push down gently when I have all of the pastry in the tin, so I can get it in the right place. With this little bun tray, like you would make fairy cakes in, it's not so difficult. With this one, with the deeper one, it's a little bit more awkward to get it right. What you don't want to do is to stretch this pastry anymore. So very, very carefully we need to get this pastry evenly into the tin, and the easiest way to do it is to lift it up and then just gently press around the edge of the tin. This pastry I only rolled twice, and then I threw away the rest of the bits because I didn't want to roll it a third time. It's meant to be a rich pastry and I don't want to be working too much extra flour into it. And the pastry needs to be baked blind, because we're just going to put a fruit and either cream or a creme patisserie inside this. We don't need to cook it with the filling in. If I were at school doing this for the baking blind, I would use baking beans, but I'm at home and I don't have any baking beans at home. But for baking blind, very carefully, you just need to make a couple of holes in the bottom of your pastry to allow any air to escape, so that we don't hopefully end up, or we hopefully don't end up with large bubbles in the pastry. And because I'm at home and I don't have any baking beans, I'm going to use foil. So I'm just going to scrunch up a bit of foil, put it inside the tin, and then press it around the edges. These little tart cases are not going to take that long in the oven to cook. I'm probably going to give them 10 minutes to start with, and then I will have a look at them. As long as the pastry around the top has started to cook and brown, that's absolutely fine, because once the edges have started to cook, they're not going to collapse. If I put these in the oven with nothing inside them, the chances are that they're going to collapse. If I'd got baking beans, I wouldn't worry about the foil. I'd just put a paper cake case in the tin, in the top of the pastry, and add a few baking beans to each one. So because of the high level of fat and sugar in this, I'm going to cook these in an oven on fan 180 and check them after 10 minutes. Okay, the pastry's had 10 minutes in the oven, and I can see around the edges, oops, put it back in, come on, out you come. Around the edges the pastry is starting to go golden brown, but the foil has done its job and held the pastry edges up in place. In the bottom you can see it's a different colour, so I just need to pop these back in for 3 or 4 minutes just to finish cooking on the bottom. The pastry cases from the fruit tartlets were allowed to cool in the tin, and as you can see they are brown all the way over. These little ones that were done in a normal bun tray, like you'd make fairy cakes, they are quite small, but they would be good for afternoon tea. So these I am going to just pipe a little bit of cream. If you wish to, you could use creme pat for this, but I'm just going to do a little swirl in here of lightly whipped cream. The slightly bigger ones, these ones, again, they could have fresh cream or creme pat, but you've got a slightly bigger recess, and it's quite nice if you can build up a little bit in the middle with the cream. It means that when you add the fruit to these, they're going to have a little bit of height, and you can decorate these with any fruit that you like. So you can add whatever fruit you like to this. It is personal preference. At the moment I have some sliced strawberries, I've got raspberries and blueberries, and I'm just going to add these onto these little tarts. The strawberries that I've quartered I can use to help give a little bit of height there, and then you can add in whichever fruits you like. The whole point of these little tarts is that they are supposed to look, excuse me, bashing into the knife. The whole point of these little tartlets is that they should look attractive and make people want to eat them. So using a contrast in colour of fruits, just putting the little blueberry on the top, does help. You can glaze these if you wish to, so you can glaze these with other fruits, with fruit jam, anything, any flavour that you want. You can just melt the fruit jam a little bit and brush over the top, or you can just leave them as they are. You can do them completely one flavour, and I'm just trying to find some small raspberries that would actually fit in this all the way around this little one, and then if I put one more raspberry in the middle. So that one is just going to be a little raspberry tart. What's important is that you get a good amount of fruit onto this so that it is not just cream and pastry. And you can arrange this, as I've said, any way that you choose. So you can divide your fruit into sections. It really doesn't matter as long as the final tart looks attractive to eat. So that one has almost 3 sections of fruit on it. So you can arrange the fruit on your desserts any way you like, and then they are ready to present.